God, no. Please, don't hurt. Please.
I have tried to write this down 4 times. 4 times in 37 years I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and tried to put into sentences what I saw in the autumn of 2021. 4 times I got 3 pages in and stopped. Not because the memory fades. It hasn't faded. Not one detail. Not the smell of that valley in the early morning. Not the sound she made when she called out into the trees. Not the look on my deputy's face when she said, very quietly, words I will never forget. I stopped because I am a man who spent 28 years being believed. In my profession, being believed is everything. You speak, people listen, people act, people survive. The moment they stop believing you, people die. That is not a metaphor, that is the arithmetic of search and rescue. And I knew I have always known that if I said out loud what I witnessed in that valley, the believing would stop. So I stayed quiet. I am 73 years old now. Last spring, my cardiologist used a phrase I have been thinking about ever since. He said my heart was operating on borrowed time. He said it gently, the way doctors say things they have said many times before. He handed me a pamphlet. He told me to make some changes. I drove home. I sat in my driveway for a long time, and I thought about Catherine Ellison. I thought about what she told me in that valley, what she showed me, what the scientists found afterward, and what they said off the record, and what they wrote in their official reports, which were not the same thing. I thought about the 37 other accounts in my private journal: hunters, loggers, rangers, a county sheriff I respected enormously, people who saw something in those forests and stayed quiet for the same reason I did. And I thought, if I leave this world without saying it out loud, then I am not a careful man protecting the truth. I am a coward burying it. My name is William Foster. I spent 28 years as lead search and rescue coordinator for one of the most remote wilderness territories in the Pacific Northwest. I found people no one else could find. And in the autumn of 2021, I found something no one was prepared for. This is my account. Every word of it is true, and I am done being quiet. Before I tell you what we found, I need to tell you about Catherine Ellison, because she is not a story to me. She is a person. A real, specific, complicated person. And she deserves to be understood as one before you hear what happened to her. Catherine was 54 years old when she disappeared. Retired schoolteacher. 26 years in a 3rd grade classroom in a small town I won't name because she asked me not to. Practical woman. Her daughter Margaret told me, the first time we met, that her mother was the least dramatic person she had ever known. She said, "My mother once broke 2 ribs hiking and drove herself to the hospital because she didn't want to make a fuss. That is who she is." Catherine had been hiking those wilderness trails for 30 years. She knew that terrain the way you know something you have loved a long time, its moods, its tricks, the places where it was beautiful and the places where it was dangerous, and the difference between the two. She was not someone who got lost. On the morning of September 14th, 2021, she packed a day bag, told Margaret she would be back by dinner, and drove to a trailhead 40 miles outside of town. She never came back for dinner. Margaret called twice. Then drove to the trailhead, found the car, called us. By nightfall, we had a search underway. I want to tell you something about the first week of that search that I have never told anyone. By day 3, I knew something was wrong. Not wrong in the way searches go wrong, not accident, not fall, not the 100 ways wilderness takes people when they stop paying attention. Wrong in a way I did not have language for. Catherine had left no trace, not a footprint, not a broken branch, not a thread of clothing on a thorn bush. In 28 years, I had never seen a person disappear so completely from terrain they knew well in good weather with a full pack and no signs of distress. I wrote in my journal that night, "She didn't get lost. She went somewhere." I did not know yet what that meant. I would not know for 3 more years. I need to tell you about my deputy before I go further, because she matters to this story. Her name is Carol Hendricks. 22 years in search and rescue. One of the finest search coordinators I have ever worked alongside. Methodical, honest, and constitutionally opposed to anything she could not verify with her own eyes. Carol and I agreed on almost everything for 22 years. We disagreed about this. During the 2nd year of searching, I made the mistake of telling her what was in my private journal, the accounts I had collected from credible people over nearly 3 decades. Footprints measuring 17 inches. shapes moving through old growth in ways that didn't match any animal. A county sheriff who told me, in confidence, that he had seen something on a ridge that he would take to his grave. Carol listened to all of it. Then she said, "William, you are letting grief make you credulous. This woman is gone. The wilderness took her. The rest of this is folklore and it doesn't belong in a search operation." She was not unkind. She was not dismissive. She was being the kind of professional she had always been. She was also wrong. But here is what I want you to understand about Carol Hendricks. She drove 3 hours to sit in the interview room the morning Catherine came back. She didn't have to. Nobody asked her to. She drove 3 hours because she is a woman who respects the truth even when it contradicts her. That matters. I will come back to Carol at the end of this account. We searched for 14 months officially. I continued informally for another 22, returning to those trails every few months, covering the same ground, looking for the trace that was never there. My wife asked me once, during the 3rd year, why I kept going back. I told her I didn't know. That was not entirely true. The truth was that the absence of any trace, no accident, no body, no evidence of any kind, had begun to feel less like a tragedy and more like a deliberate choice, as if Catherine had not been taken by the wilderness, as if she had chosen it. October 14th, 2024. A young Forest Service ranger named Patrick, 6 years on the job, good instincts, not given to exaggeration, was running routine water quality checks in a section of backcountry that received maybe a dozen permitted visitors per year. He came around a bend in the trail and stopped. A woman was sitting on a flat rock beside a creek, small fire going, metal cup on a stone. She was wearing clothing unlike anything he had seen, sewn from animal hides, remarkably well made, carefully maintained. Her hair was long and gray and braided neatly, her skin deeply weathered, her eyes clear and calm and completely still. He thought, "Hermit, it happens." He introduced himself, asked if she needed help. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "My name is Catherine Ellison. I've been here a while. I imagine my daughter has been worried." Patrick told me later in a recorded statement, because I asked for one, that her composure was the part that stayed with him, not the clothes, not the location. Her composure, he said, she wasn't relieved, she wasn't scared, she wasn't confused, she was just ready. Like she had been sitting there waiting for someone to come along, and she had made peace with however long that took. Before the support team arrived, she asked him one question: "How long has it been?" He told her 3 years. She was quiet for a moment. Then I have a lot to explain, and I need you to let me finish before you decide what to make of it, because what I'm going to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, and I have been waiting 3 years to say it to someone who might actually listen. Patrick radioed for support. And then this is the part he did not put in his initial report. He walked to the creek to check something he had noticed when he first approached. Prints in the soft mud at the water's edge. He told me, 3 weeks later, that he had stood looking at those prints for a long time before he understood what he was seeing. Large, bipedal, the biggest measuring somewhere between 16 and 18 inches. He said, "I'm not an expert in tracks, but I know what a bear print looks like, and I know what a human print looks like, and I know that what I was looking at in that creek bed was neither one." He covered them with a flat stone before the support team arrived. He doesn't know exactly why. He said it felt like the right thing to do. I understood that completely. The official interview took place the following morning. A sheriff's investigator, a social worker, me, and at the last moment, Carol Hendricks, who had heard the news and driven 3 hours through the night because she felt she owed it to Catherine to be there. Catherine sat down across from us and folded her hands on the table. She looked like a woman who had rehearsed this moment many times. She said, "I know how this is going to sound. I have had 3 years to think about how this is going to sound, and I have decided that how it sounds is less important than whether it's true. So I'm going to tell you the truth, all of it, and I'm asking you to extend me the same courtesy you would extend to any witness. Let me finish, then ask your questions." Nobody spoke. She began. She described the morning she disappeared, the trail she had walked dozens of times, the ridge where she stopped, the figure at the tree line. She described it plainly. No embellishment, no drama. The way a careful person describes something they have looked at from every angle for a long time. Approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark reddish-brown hair, standing completely upright, watching me with an expression I can only describe as curious, not threatening, not aggressive, curious. She paused. "I know what people call what I saw. I grew up in this part of the country. I heard the stories my whole life. I am not afraid of the word. What I saw is what people around here have called Bigfoot for as long as anyone can remember. I say that not to be dramatic. I say it because it is the honest word, and because the people who have been saying it for 100 years, the hunters, the loggers, the farmers, the rangers who wrote things in private journals they never filed, they deserve to be taken seriously long before now. I felt something shift in the room when she said that. I glanced at Carol. Carol was looking at her hands. Catherine described following the figure for 2 hours, into a valley she had never seen on any map, and she knew those maps. She had studied them for 30 years. The valley did not exist on any of them. The figure waited at the entrance. Catherine stood there for a long time. Then she stepped in. She said, "I understood that I was making a decision I could not undo. I made it anyway, because what I had seen in that figure's eyes in the brief moments I had been close enough to see clearly was not threat. It was recognition. Two different kinds of person, standing at the edge of a valley, deciding whether to trust each other. That is what I walked into, not the unknown. A meeting. The social worker asked her something about psychological state, whether she had been frightened, whether she had felt coerced. Catherine looked at her with the patience of a woman who has answered student questions for 26 years. She said, "I was the most frightened I have ever been in my life, and I have never felt less coerced." Both of those things were true at the same time. I find that most important things work that way. 3 days after Catherine came back, she agreed to guide us in. Me, a wildlife biologist named Dr. Howard Barnes from Fish and Wildlife, 2 forensic investigators, and Carol, who asked to come and said almost nothing the entire journey. The approach took most of a day. Through terrain I would describe, and I have been in difficult wilderness for 28 years, as unlike anything I had navigated before. Not because it was technically challenging, because it felt deliberate, as if the paths that led to the valley were designed to discourage arrival. Passages through rock that seemed placed. Creek crossings that left no obvious trail on the other side. I have thought about that many times since. When we reached the valley, the team went quiet. I went quiet. It was a natural basin, maybe a quarter-mile across, surrounded by old growth so dense the light came through, filtered and green. A creek through the center, the kind of place that does not feel temporarily unvisited. It feels like it has always been this way, before us, after us, entirely indifferent to our presence. Catherine's camp was at the eastern edge. Dr. Barnes stopped mid-sentence while describing it into his recorder. He told me later, I was explaining the structural technique, and then I stopped, because I realized I was describing construction methodology I didn't recognize, and I have studied wilderness shelter across 4 continents. The footprints were near the creek. Multiple sets, the largest 17.5 inches. Dr. Barnes measured the stride length twice, then a third time. Then he straightened up and said to me, quietly so the others would not hear, 68-inch stride. William, that requires leg proportions outside the range of every species I study. I did not say anything. I had known what we would find before we came. We deployed 4 trail cameras. We came back 30 days later. 2 of the 4 had been deactivated. Batteries removed, placed neatly on the ground beside the camera housing. Our forensic investigator spent 2 days pursuing the theory that someone had interfered with the equipment. She checked permit records, looked for boot prints near the cameras, looked for any evidence of human approach. She found nothing. No prints. No evidence of any human presence near those cameras. When she finally sat down and accepted that there was no human explanation, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I don't know how to write this report." I said, "Write what the evidence shows, not what you think it means." She did. The 2 remaining cameras had captured something. Large, bipedal, moving through the creek, crossing at night. Infrared footage, grainy, limited. But in one clip the figure paused, turned directly toward the camera, and held still for almost 4 seconds. 4 seconds of looking directly into the lens. Dr. Barnes sent that footage to a colleague, a biomechanical specialist, 30 years studying primate movement. He sent it without context. She called him the same afternoon. She said, "The gait is consistent with a large bipedal primate. It is not human locomotion, not even close. Where did you get this, Howard?" When he explained, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I can tell you what the biomechanics show. I cannot tell you what it means publicly. I am not going on record. But I want you to know what you have here is real, and it is going to take a long time for people to be ready for what it means." She never provided a written report. Her name will not appear in any official document related to this investigation. That is not a conspiracy. That is a scientist protecting a career she has spent 30 years building. I understand it. I spent 28 years doing the same thing. Some months after Catherine came home, she agreed to one recorded conversation with me. Just me. No investigators, no social workers. She said she was doing it because I had never stopped looking. She said that earned me the truth. I have listened to that recording many times. I want to read you parts of it. She described the first weeks in the valley as a process of being evaluated. The male who had led her there appearing each morning at a distance, watching, withdrawing, never threatening, simply present. She said it reminded her of something a colleague had told her once about getting a very shy child to trust you. You don't approach. You show up. You let them set the pace. You make yourself predictable. She made herself predictable. Food began appearing near her camp. She described it as the most extraordinary thing she had ever experienced, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. Roots, berries, small game, already prepared. Left close enough that she would find it, far enough that it was clearly not an approach. It was an offering. The first real exchange came 6 weeks in. She had twisted her ankle badly on a creek crossing, could not walk properly, stayed in camp for 2 days. On the second evening, the male approached closer than he ever had, perhaps 30 feet. He observed her for several minutes, then disappeared into the forest. Returned within an hour carrying plants she later identified as having documented anti-inflammatory properties. He placed them near her, turned, left. She said to me, "William, I need you to understand what that was. That was not instinct. Instinct does not make a round trip. Instinct does not select specific plants and carry them to a specific individual. That was a decision made by someone who observed a problem, identified a solution, and acted on it. That is thought. That is care." She paused on the recording. Then, "That is exactly what we tell ourselves separates us from animals, and it was not us doing it." She described what she came to understand was a family group. The male. An older female with what Catherine called, and she smiled when she said this, strong opinions about everything. 2 younger males who were curious and occasionally reckless in the way young males tend to be regardless of species. And a female, approximately Catherine's own age, who became something she had not expected. A companion, she said. People imagine Bigfoot as something frightening, something primitive, something that does not have an interior life. What I experienced was a family, with dynamics and preferences and what I can only describe as personality. The female who became my companion had a quality of stillness I have never encountered in any person I have ever known. She could sit beside me for an hour without movement, without sound, and communicate more in that silence than most people manage in an entire conversation. I asked Catherine why she stayed. I had been waiting to ask that question for a long time. She was quiet for nearly a minute. Then she said, "I had spent 54 years in a world that moves very fast and asks very little of you in return. I watched my students get a little more distracted every year, a little more hurried, a little more disconnected from anything slow or quiet or patient. I watched the world outside my classroom window getting louder, and I drove my commute and watched my television and paid my bills and told myself this was living. What I found in that valley was the first honest life I had ever lived. Everything was real. Every meal was earned. Every relationship was chosen deliberately because there was no default setting, no casual acquaintance, no way to be present without being fully present. I stayed because I had finally found the thing I had been tired from looking for. That is the truest thing I can tell you." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question I was almost afraid to ask. I said, "Catherine, do you wish you hadn't come back?" She looked at me for a long time. She said, "I came back because of Margaret. Because a mother who disappears into a valley and never comes home is a wound that doesn't close, and I could not do that to her. But there are mornings when I stand on her back porch facing the mountains and I think about the valley. And I think about the female who sat beside me in silence for an hour and said more than I can explain. And I think, I left something out there that I will not get back. And I am not entirely sure that is the wrong outcome. I think it might be the most important thing that ever happened to me. And I think I traded it for the right reasons. And I think that is enough." The hair samples we collected came back from the forensic laboratory 3 weeks later. The lead analyst called Dr. Barnes directly. Primate biological markers. Mitochondrial DNA consistent with a large primate. genetic sequence matching nothing in the database. Not human, not any known great ape, not any documented North American species. The analyst said, "This is either a contaminated sample which your collection protocol makes unlikely, or it is biological material from a species that has not been formally catalogued." Dr. Barnes filed his formal report. His supervisor called him in and closed the door. She was not hostile. She was careful. She asked about chain of custody, about independent verification, about what a report of this nature would mean for the department's credibility. Dr. Barnes told me later, she wasn't trying to suppress anything. She was trying to protect the integrity of the process, which is what you should do before making a significant claim. I understood that. Even when it was frustrating, the language in the final report was softened. Anomalous biological material, rather than unidentified primate species. Dr. Barnes accepted those revisions. He said to me, "The truth of the evidence doesn't change because the official language is cautious. It will still be there when people are ready to look at it clearly." The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, I should say the relevant wildlife authority, opened a formal file. As of the time I am recording this, it remains an active investigation. What that means practically, no one can say. What it means symbolically, a formal file, an official inquiry, a question that is being filed rather than laughed at, is something I never expected to see in my lifetime. I consider it progress. Quiet, slow, unsatisfying progress, but real. I want to tell you about Carol Hendrick because she is the most important part of this account. Not because she believed. She didn't, not entirely, not at first, but because of what she did with her disbelief. She drove 3 hours to sit in that interview room. She listened to Catherine with the full attention of a woman who respects evidence even when it frightens her. She went into that valley and looked at those footprints with her own eyes. She never issued a public statement. She called me about 6 months after everything happened. We talked for a long time. At the end of the conversation, she said something I have thought about every day since. She said, "William, I still don't know what it was. I don't know if I will ever be able to say I know, but I know Catherine wasn't lying, and I know those prints were real, and I know that the scientist who wouldn't go on record wasn't afraid of being wrong. She was afraid of being right. And I think," Carol said, "that I understand that fear a little better now than I did before." That is the most honest thing I have ever heard anyone say about this subject. That is what intellectual honesty actually looks like. Not the people who are certain it's real, not the people who are certain it isn't. The people who look at what the evidence shows and say, "I don't know, but I am paying attention." I am 73 years old. My heart is running on borrowed time. My cardiologist has given me a pamphlet and some changes to make, and a look that says he has had this conversation before and he knows how they tend to go. I have made my peace with the arithmetic, but I needed to say this before the time runs out. Not because I expect you to believe me. I spent 28 years understanding that belief is a complicated thing and that you cannot manufacture it in another person. You can only offer them the truth and let them do what they will with it. I am offering you the truth. Catherine Ellison walked into a wilderness valley in the autumn of 2021 and spent 3 years living alongside a family of creatures that no official science has yet been willing to formally name. She came home because she loved her daughter. She is living quietly now in a house with a porch that faces the mountains, and some mornings she stands on that porch and listens in the direction of those mountains for something that is too far away to hear. The footprints are documented. The hair samples are in a laboratory file, marked anomalous. The trail camera footage has been seen by a biomechanical specialist who will not go on record but who told a colleague that what she saw was real. An active investigation file exists. A private journal containing 37 corroborating accounts exists. A former deputy coordinator who spent 22 years not believing this and who now says, "I still don't know what it was, but I know Catherine wasn't lying, she exists too." That is what the evidence looks like. Not proof. Not the kind of proof that closes a case and answers every question, but the kind that opens a door. The kind that says, something is here. Something has always been here. Something that is not what we thought. Something that is more than we were prepared for. I am not asking you to walk through that door. I am only telling you that it is open. Catherine never told anyone the exact location of the valley. She made a promise. She is the kind of woman who keeps promises. And somewhere in the old forests of the Pacific Northwest, in a valley that appears on no map, that has never been surveyed, that has been there since long before anyone decided what was possible and what wasn't, life continues, quietly, carefully, on its own terms, as it has for a very long time, as it will, I suspect, long after my borrowed time runs out. My name is William Foster. I spent 28 years pulling people out of mountains, and the last thing I want to say, before whatever time I have left runs out, is this. The mountains are not empty. They have never been empty. And the truth, the whole, strange, beautiful, impossible truth deserves better than our silence.